The call from my mom came on Tuesday afternoon, when I was hurriedly sorting through a stack of carefully pressed blouses and jackets, preparing for another sales trip, mentally replaying the upcoming meetings with potential clients in my head and hoping that this time I would be able to conclude at least a couple of really worthwhile contracts. I recognized the number on the phone screen and was about to switch the call to voicemail, sensing that there might be nothing urgent, but something barely perceptible, awakened on the edge of intuition, made me press the answer button. "Barbara, dear, how are you?" Her mother's voice sounded the way it always did when she needed help, a favor, too soft, with a note of forced friendliness, as if there was something more hidden behind the outward warm concern, not expressed directly, but already determining the outcome of the conversation. I held the phone between my shoulder and ear and continued to put my clothes in the suitcase, while trying not to show the irritation that always aroused in me when my mother started a conversation in that tone, not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew perfectly well that the request, whatever it was, most likely, it will require more than a simple approval from me. "It's okay, Mom," I replied, pulling the zipper on the side pocket of the suitcase. "I'm just going to Chicago tomorrow." "What happened?" There was a moment of silence on the phone, then Mom sighed softly but clearly, as if preparing to voice something unpleasant but inevitable. "I have some news," she finally said, and from the careful way she chose her words, I immediately realized that I wasn't going to like this news. "Your sister is back in town." I froze, letting what I had said settle into my mind, and then, as if casually, I clarified, trying to keep my voice steady, although anxiety was already growing inside. "You mean you're back?" "Yesterday, Key and Alvise moved from Arizona." I couldn't help but bite my lip, lingering in place with my suitcase still unzipped. Celia and I hadn't spoken in almost 4 years, not since the day when Eleanor's grandmother's will was read out at the law office, and it finally became clear which of us was getting what. "Oh," I said, not knowing what else to say. "I thought her husband was doing well there. She always bragged about it during the holidays." Her mother's voice dropped a little, and there was a faint note of sympathy in her tone. "Well, it didn't quite work out as they hoped. Apparently, they had problems with their business partners, and they decided it was better to return home and start over." I squinted, mechanically pushing the suitcase closer to the foot of the bed, and although I said only 2 words, their meaning was much deeper than it seemed at first glance. "I see it." Because I knew exactly where this conversation was heading. "The thing is, honey, they're living with us now," Mom continued, making her voice as conciliatory as possible. "But you know how small our place is. Your stepfather's knees have been getting worse lately, and their presence in the guest room means he now has nowhere to do physical therapy exercises." I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 5 to keep my irritation from getting the better of me. "Mom, are you asking what I'm thinking? Are you asking?" She hesitated only for a moment, but then she spoke faster, with some subtle hope in her voice. "Well, the house your grandmother left you has 3 bedrooms, and you're all alone in this big place. It will just be temporary until they find a job and get back on their feet." Grandmother Eleanor's house. My sanctuary. The only place that truly belonged to me after a childhood spent with the constant feeling that I was only a temporary guest there. After my father died when I was 5 years old, my mother remarried just 18 months later, and soon Celia appeared, who, like a small gravitational black hole, absorbed all the attention, care, and love that could once belong to me. I became an afterthought, a part of the past that was convenient to leave behind for a new future with a new husband and a new family. "How temporary is it?" I asked, biting the edge of my fingernail. "Oh, not for long," Mom assured me hastily. "A month or 2 at most. Alvise has already scheduled several promising interviews." I doubted it, but all I said out loud was, "Okay. They can stay in the blue bedroom. But only until they find their own place." Mom breathed a sigh of relief, thanked me with exaggerated warmth, and then we said goodbye, and I finally put the phone down next to me, sitting on the edge of the bed and letting the memories come flooding back to me in a thick, unstoppable wave. Celia. She was 6 years younger than me, Bruno's own daughter, surrounded from birth by such adoration that the world seemed to revolve around her, and her mother and stepfather indulged her whims in every possible way, justifying any behavior and emphasizing that she was just a child, and I, the older sister, should be tolerant. I couldn't do anything right. When I complained that she took my things without asking, I was told that I was too serious. When I locked myself in my room to be alone for a while, my mother reminded me that a family should be friendly. When I resisted, I was accused of being selfish. College was the first real breath of freedom. Living in a dorm has finally brought me a personal space that no one has invaded. My grandmother Eleanor died in my senior year. I was devastated, but an unexpected gift appeared in the midst of my grief. She left me her house and savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help me start a life. The family's reaction was quick and loud. "It's not fair, we have to sell it and split the money." I remember sitting at a table in a lawyer's office, clutching the cold wooden arms of a chair, and across from me, with pouting lips and a haughty expression on her face, sat Celia. She wasn't the granddaughter of Eleanor's grandmother, but that didn't stop her from considering that she was entitled to a portion of the inheritance. I heard her indignant voice, "She's not my grandmother. Who told you that you're better than me? We are all her family." I looked up at her and, barely able to contain my irritation, said, "She was my father's mother. You're not related to me at all, but we're still family." I turned to my mom, hoping for support. "Mom, tell her." But, true to themselves, Mom and Bruno only gently suggested that I think about sharing with my sister. I refused. This moment completely destroyed the already tense relationship between us, and after that we hardly spoke, except for the rare obligatory family gatherings. I attended her wedding when she turned 20, watching her marry Alvise, a man 10 years older than her, with family money and business connections. They moved to Arizona shortly after the wedding, and I admit I was relieved to know that she was even further away from my life now. For years later, they returned, and soon they were to move into my house. I finished packing for my trip to Chicago with a sense of anxiety. My work as a sales representative for a medical supplies company forced me to travel regularly, and if I used to enjoy it, now business trips have become a salvation for me. They provided an opportunity to escape from the chaos that Celia would inevitably bring with her. A week after the conversation with Mom, they arrived. For suitcases of designer clothes and accessories, forced smiles and loud assurances about how glad they were to be back in their hometown. Celia hugged me with artificial enthusiasm. Her perfume was too sweet, and her smile was too wide to be sincere. Alvise, with his well-groomed beard and expensive watch, shook my hand warmly. I led them into the blue bedroom and let them unpack, but as I hung Celia's third designer coat in the closet, I couldn't help but think that selling just one of these items would probably cover a month's rent for a small but cozy apartment somewhere in the city. At dinner that evening, Alvise cleared his throat and, with the air of a man who has everything under control, announced, "I already have some promising ideas. I'm meeting with an old college friend tomorrow, who currently works at an investment bank. I sincerely hoped that he would actually find something suitable as soon as possible." Celia, meanwhile, was twirling a fork in a bowl of pasta, lazily stirring the sauce, as if the food was of no interest to her. "I'm not looking for a job yet," she suddenly said, glancing at me quickly, as if checking my reaction. "I'm more of a housewife, you know. I love taking care of the house and making everything beautiful." I raised my eyebrows, trying not to smile too snidely. "Well, it's just perfect," I said with exaggerated politeness. "Since you like doing household chores, you can take over the cleaning, cooking, and laundry while you're here." Her face instantly fell, and the spoon with a piece of pasta hovered in the air. "Oh no, that's not what I meant," she protested, blinking rapidly. "I like to do it at home. And here. I'm a guest." "So you're a housewife, but only when it's convenient?" I asked dryly, crossing my arms over my chest. Celia rolled her eyes in annoyance. Don't twist my words, she snapped. I just meant that I'm still settling in. Alvise hurriedly jumped up from his chair to change the subject, and I dropped the conversation, but I already knew how this temporary arrangement would develop. Some things never change. 2 weeks of living with Celia and Alvise flew by like a blur. I set a routine: wake up early, leave for work before they get up, and come home as late as possible. It wasn't perfect, but it helped minimize the time spent with my sister, who, despite her loud claims that she was a housewife, had already returned to her old habits. Every night, I'd come home and find dishes in the sink, clothes strewn all over the living room, and no sign of dinner, while Celia sprawled on my couch, scrolling through her phone or poring over a reality TV show. "Oh, you're back," she said lazily, not even looking up. "Can you cook something?" "I'm starving." The first few times, I bit my tongue and cooked dinner for all of us, trying to convince myself that it wouldn't last. But by the second week, my patience was wearing thin. One evening, having discovered that the house was in disarray again, I wearily kicked off my shoes at the threshold, hung my coat on a hook and, going into the living room, stopped by the sofa, on which Celia lay stretched out at full length, with a phone in her hands. Pillows were scattered around her, like decorations for a scene about idle wealth. A blanket was huddled into a ball. 2 empty coffee cups stood on the coffee table, and next to them, like the crown of all this chaos, there was a plate with the remains of a pie covered with dried crumbs. I crossed my arms over my chest and narrowed my eyes. "Celia, what did you do today?" She lazily looked up from the screen, toying with her blonde curls, and with the expression of someone who has too many responsibilities, she drawled. "Oh, I went to see my mom and Bruno. Then I met Jessica from high school. Did you know that she has 2 children? And now her life is so boring. Did you have time, maybe, to vacuum or run the laundry?" I deliberately calmly turned the conversation to another plane, although I was already boiling with irritation inside. Celia rolled her eyes and exhaled loudly. "God, Barbara, you're so tense." I was busy reconnecting with people. "Besides, this is your house, don't you want it to be nice?" I had to leave before I said something I might regret later. The only one in this house who somehow created the appearance of effort was Alvise. At least he left every morning in a suit and returned in the evening with stories about interviews and meetings with potential employers. I couldn't figure out if he was really looking for a job or if he was just avoiding home, but at least he wasn't adding to my stress. When my boss called and told me that I was going on a week-long business trip to Boston, I almost hugged him on the phone. 7 whole days away from this chaos seemed to me the best gift that fate could give me. The night before I left, I tried to make it as clear as possible to Celia what rules she should follow. "Celia, I'll be gone for a week. I don't want any parties, no guests who will stay the night, and even more so, no messes that will await me when I return," I said, closing the zipper on the suitcase. Celia dramatically rolled her eyes and threw up her hands theatrically. "Yes, Mom, is there anything else? Maybe I haven't breathed your precious air or sat on your sacred furniture yet." I clenched my teeth so as not to respond the way I wanted to. "By the way, Alvise has a second interview next week," she added with a hint of hope in her voice. "So I hope we'll stop bothering you soon anyway." I nodded, deciding that further conversation was useless. The next morning, I left for the airport, leaving the severity of the situation behind me and hoping that at least during these days I would be able to exhale. The trip to Boston turned out to be a real salvation. Not only did I get rid of the constant irritation, but I also signed a major deal with the hospital, which earned me a substantial bonus. My boss was thrilled and even offered to take an extra day off, but I refused, booking the earliest flight home. Despite the fears that something would go wrong during my absence, part of me still hoped that Celia and Alvise respected my wishes. When my flight landed late on Sunday evening, I got out of the taxi and was relieved to see that the house looked in perfect order from the outside. That was already a good sign. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I immediately noticed something strange. There were 3 unfamiliar suitcases in the hallway by the stairs. I frowned at them, and then I heard laughter coming from the living room, not only the voices of Celia and Alvise, but also some other, vaguely familiar ones. Dropping my bag, I quickly headed towards the sound. The scene that opened up to me made me freeze in place. Celia and Alvise were sitting on my couch with cups of coffee in their hands, and opposite them were 2 elderly people whom I did not immediately recognize, but after a couple of seconds my memory helpfully gave me the answer: Alvise's parents. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me in surprise, and then Celia, visibly nervous, smiled broadly. "Barbara." Her voice was unnaturally high. "We weren't expecting you so early." "Obviously," I replied coldly, glancing meaningfully at the unfamiliar luggage by the stairs. "What's going on here?" Celia smiled tightly, as if she was already preparing for an unpleasant conversation. "Oh, do you remember Alvise's parents, Gaston and Linda? They decided to come visit for a while. Isn't that sweet?" I opened my mouth to protest and remind everyone that this was my house, and I wasn't allowed to invite guests, but before I could say a word, Celia jumped up, grabbed my arm and practically dragged me into the kitchen, throwing over her shoulder a ringing, "Give us a minute." The door slammed behind us, and the next moment my sister turned to me with an expression of intense peace, as if she knew in advance that I would have to listen to some ridiculous request, but hoped that my patience was not exhausted yet. "Are you crazy?" I hissed, barely restraining myself from raising my voice. "I told you, no guests." I know," she whispered, desperately clutching my hands, as if hoping that physical contact would help her words gain more credibility. "But I need you to play along with me at least a little. It's only been 2 weeks. 2 weeks maximum." "Absolutely not," I snapped, yanking my hands out of her grasp. "I want them to leave tomorrow." "Please, Barbara." Her voice became even quieter, almost pleading, and there was a strange desperation in her eyes that made me tense up. "I told them that this house belongs to me." I blinked in disbelief. "What did you do?" Celia nervously rubbed the back of her head with her palm. "Alvise played along. They've been treating me much better since they think I have this wonderful place. After the business collapsed, they were so cold to me, accusing me of distracting Alvise or something like that. It helps us save face." I stared at her with wide eyes, trying to comprehend the insanity of the situation. "You're crazy," I finally blurted out. "I will not play along with this absurdity." Celia grabbed my hands again, squeezing them so tightly that I could feel the warmth of her palms. "I'll do all the housework, I swear. I'll cook, clean, do the laundry, do everything I haven't done before. Just pretend that you're staying with me for a while because you're having problems at work." I took a deep breath, preparing to put an end to this conversation, but then I looked at her face, at this sincere, almost childish plea, and felt something tremble inside. It was ridiculous, completely insane, but 2 weeks, I said slowly. "Not a day more. And you better keep your promise about housework." Relief flooded her face like a wave washing away all doubts and fears. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I swear you won't regret it." We returned to the living room, where I was introduced as Celia's sister, who was temporarily staying with her due to difficulties at work. Alvise's parents nodded understandingly, although there was a slight hint of disapproval in Linda's eyes, as if she immediately sensed some kind of unreliability in me. Dinner that evening consisted of dishes ordered from the restaurant across the street, although Celia easily stated that she had cooked everything herself. Linda and Gaston dominated the conversation, talking about how their son's business had collapsed, blaming fierce competition and unfair partners for everything, without once mentioning that Alvise might have made mistakes himself. When the meal was over, Celia turned to me with a sweet smile that immediately made me wary. "Barbara, could you do the dishes while I chat with Gaston and Linda?" she said, and without waiting for an answer, she added, Thank you, little sister. And that's how I realized that I was being played. As I stood at the sink, washing dishes, watching Celia laugh and charm her relatives in MY living room, I had a nagging feeling that all her promises about housework would remain empty words. And my hunches were right. A week passed, and I was finally convinced that I had become not just the mistress of this house, but also its maintenance staff. I'd wake up early, go to work while everyone else was still asleep, and come back in the evening in complete chaos. Alvise completely stopped looking for work, devoting his days to walks with his parents, city tours, and leisurely lunches in restaurants. Every evening, when I returned home, I found that Celia had put on a show for her relatives, pretending to be the perfect hostess who takes care of everything, although her concern, as a rule, was to order food and pretend that she had spent the whole day in the kitchen. At some point, she even started creating an artificial mess, leaving dirty dishes, scattering kitchen towels, arranging ingredients on the countertop to create the illusion of the cooking process. Today I made carbonara, she proudly announced one evening when we gathered at the table. I looked at the plate and immediately recognized it, a specialty dish from a restaurant located 2 blocks from my house. You're doing great, daughter, Linda smiled, not doubting the truth of her words for a second. Yes, carbonara is wonderful, Gaston agreed. I glared at Celia, but she just grinned cheekily and shrugged imperceptibly. Barbara, will you wash the dishes for us? What is it? She asked innocently. I gripped my fork so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Of course, Celia, I replied with the same sweet smile. Are you tired after a long day of cooking? Oh, don't even tell me. She sighed, leaning back in her chair with exaggerated drama. I froze, unable to believe what I had just heard. In front of me were 3 people who, without batting an eye, condemned me for my ingratitude, for my selfishness, for my unwillingness to contribute to our common life, while completely ignoring the fact that I was the only one who earned this house, paid all the bills, cleaned, cooked, or rather, she cleaned up after Celia, who cooked by ordering food at the restaurant. And now, when I tried to set boundaries at least a little, I was portrayed as some kind of shameless freeloader. I tried to find the words, but the indignation was so great that my throat went dry. This is my house. Well, technically, Linda began with an expression of condescending patience, but I held up my hand sharply, silencing her. No, not technically, I hissed, and it was probably the first time since they'd lived here that I'd let my anger spill out. This house belongs to me, I pay for it, I pay for utilities, I spend my money on it, while you all have fun, as if at a resort. Barbara. Celia began, but I didn't let her get in a word. No, shut up, Celia. You promised you'd do all the housework, but instead you spend your days lying on the couch or pretending to be a great hostess in front of his parents. And now you've also decided that I have to pay for your electricity, for your water, for your restaurant dinners. But you live here too, Alvise tried to put in a word, but I abruptly turned to him. Do you work at all, Alvise? Have you ever tried to find a job in all these weeks? My voice was low and steady, but that only made it more threatening. Or do you think I should provide for you too? Alvise frowned, and something irritated, even hurt, appeared in his gaze, but he chose not to answer. Honey, I understand that you're angry, Linda said in the same condescending tone that an adult uses to talk to a stubborn child. But we are visiting here, and, as it seems to me, it would be right to show at least a little hospitality. The family should help each other. Help? I laughed bitterly. An interesting definition of help. Does this mean that now you and Gaston will contribute and pay half of the bills? Or is help only when I have to meekly pull 4 more adults on myself? There was a tense silence in the room. I saw how Linda and Gaston exchanged glances, how Celia lowered her eyes, how Alvise clasped his hands in a lock, as if weighing something in his head. We can't afford such expenses right now, Gaston finally said, lifting his chin, as if his confident tone could make this statement fair. Of course you can't, I nodded, crossing my arms over my chest. Because you have fun from morning till night, instead of thinking about expenses. Barbara, let's not be rude. Linda began, but I stepped forward, silencing her. 2 weeks, I said flatly. We agreed that it would be a maximum of 2 weeks. This deadline expires in 3 days. You're all leaving. I saw Celia's eyes flash, and she leaned forward, clearly ready to argue, but when she saw my face, she changed her mind. Barbara, please, her voice was quieter than usual, lacking the same confidence. We can't leave now. You can, I said harshly. And you'll leave. But if you're still here in 3 days, I'll call the police and report the trespass, I said coldly, leaving her no chance to object. The silence was almost palpable now. I saw Linda's lips tighten into a thin line, as Gaston turned away, as if considering possible options, as Alvise frowned, for the first time in a while, seemingly realizing that the situation was out of their control. But I didn't care anymore. Celia, taking advantage of my own home, was too big. Without saying another word, I grabbed the bills and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me, feeling the indignation growing inside me, spreading through my body in waves of hot anger mixed with impotence. I could hear them downstairs, their muffled voices rising and falling, and I didn't need to see their faces to imagine Celia playing the victim, her relatives nodding sympathetically, comforting her at my expense. The injustice of that moment burned inside me like a red-hot iron. When Hunter finally forced me to leave the room and go downstairs, I felt the icy atmosphere of dinner literally envelop me as soon as I entered the living room. Linda and Gaston barely spared me a glance, their disapproval hanging in the air like a thundercloud about to burst into a downpour of indignation. Celia pretended to be focused on her food, avoiding eye contact with me, but I could see her hands nervously twisting the edge of the napkin. The only one who looked uncomfortable was Derek, who kept fiddling with his fork, glancing uneasily from me to his parents, as if sensing that a storm was inevitably coming. Linda's voice cut through the silence, smooth and controlled, but with a note of superiority that she didn't even try to hide. Celia, dear, my father always taught me that honesty and respect are the foundation of any family, she said, putting down her fork and wiping her lips with a napkin with ostentatious slowness. Of course, Mom, Celia replied obediently, tensing up like a student who knows she's about to be reprimanded. That's why we think we have to speak out, Linda shot me an expressive look, which read the constant condemnation. We don't think having your sister here will work. She's clearly overstaying your welcome, and frankly, her attitude is disturbing the peace of your beautiful home. I almost choked on the water. The realization of what was happening overwhelmed me. They were discussing not how to leave on their own, but how to get rid of me. Gaston nodded in agreement, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms across his chest. You've been more than generous, but there comes a time when you have to put your family first. With these words, he turned to his son, raising an eyebrow in a demanding manner. Derek, I agree, don't you, son? Derek muttered something, continuing to stare intently at his plate, as if he hoped that if he stared at it long enough, he would simply disappear into thin air. Linda ignored him and continued. We think it would be better if Barbara finds another place to live as soon as possible. All eyes turned to Celia, waiting for her reaction. I watched her carefully, trying to figure out if she had the courage to admit the truth or if she would try to get out of it again. Her gaze darted between her husband's relatives and me, and a clear inner struggle was reflected on her face. Then, taking a deep breath, she finally spoke. Barbara, her voice was strained, like a string about to break. I think it would be better if you packed your things. I need you to move out in 2 weeks. The silence was deafening. Gaston and Linda nodded approvingly, while Alvise stared at his wife with an expression of genuine shock. I felt a wave of cold, blinding anger rising inside me. Celia looked at me pleadingly again, as if hoping that I would once again play along with her ridiculous lie, that I would humbly nod and meekly agree that I was being kicked out of my own house. But something in me finally broke. I slowly stood up, carefully placed my napkin on the table and looked around, realizing how absurd the situation had become. "No," I said softly but clearly. "Excuse me?" Linda blinked in disbelief. "I said no," I repeated, feeling more and more relieved by my own decision with each word. "I'm not leaving." "It's not your decision, young lady," Gaston interjected, his voice filled with icy condemnation. I leaned forward, placing my palms on the dining table, on the very table that I inherited from my grandmother, in this very house in which I was born and raised. "Actually, everyone in this room has exactly 2 days to pack up and leave," I said, looking directly at Celia. "And I mean everyone." Celia's face paled. "Barbara, please, can we talk about this in private?" "No more personal conversations, Celia," I shook my head, looking her firmly in the eye. "I'm done with lying and manipulation." I looked at Linda and Gaston, whose appearance seemed to fade under the weight of my words. "There's something you should know." I folded my arms across my chest, giving myself a few seconds to enjoy their confusion. "This house belongs to me." Linda whirled on Celia, her lips trembling with rage. "Is that true?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice now sounding like a taut string. Celia swallowed hard. "I can explain. You told us this was your house." Gaston stood up heavily, looking at her with severe severity. Alvise, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, we were just trying to save face after the business collapsed." His voice was shaking. "We didn't want you to know how bad it was." But Linda was already on her feet, her face contorted with the realization that she had been fooled. "Did you let us humiliate ourselves in front of this woman, calling her a freeloader, when all this time she was feeding us and giving us a roof over our heads?" I lifted my chin and looked down at her. 2 days, I reminded him, feeling a surge of triumph in my chest. "Or I'll call the police." The next few minutes turned into real chaos. Linda and Gaston, not shy in their expressions, attacked Derek and Celia with angry reproaches, their voices overlapping each other, merging into a cacophony of indignation, condemnation, and disappointment. Celia, sobbing, tried to justify herself, but the words got confused on her tongue, turning into incoherent, pathetic explanations that sound more unconvincing by the second. Alvise, as if crushed by the weight of what was happening, put his head in his hands and sat motionless, not making the slightest attempt to intervene or support his wife, realizing, probably, that any of his words would be useless in this heated conflict. I stood on the sidelines, watching this scene with a sense of cold, detached satisfaction, realizing that all these layered, sophisticated lies had finally collapsed, exposed to the public, and that my sister, who was used to deceiving, evading, and manipulating others for her own benefit, now found herself in the same situation, which she used to create for others. However, when the shouting and useless arguments dragged on, when it became obvious that no one here wanted to admit guilt, but instead everyone was trying to shift responsibility to another, I got tired of it. I slammed my palm down on the table, making the plates and glasses shake, and the hum of voices instantly subsided. In the silence that followed, there was only the clink of glass and Celia's trembling breath. "I don't care about your family drama," I said in a flat, calm voice that nevertheless left no room for objections. "I want you all out of my house." Linda stood up abruptly, her face frozen in a mask of contempt and ostentatious dignity, with which she was accustomed to behave in any situation. "We're leaving immediately," she said, casting a look of icy contempt at Derek and Celia. "We won't stay a minute in a house built on lies." She looked at her son and daughter-in-law with a look that radiated cold fury. "And you two don't expect to come running to us after this humiliation." Her voice sounded like a sentence. Within an hour, Linda and Gaston packed their bags, called a taxi, and left without even saying goodbye. The door slammed shut behind them with a finality that seemed to symbolize the end of this chapter of my life. As soon as they left, Celia exploded. "How could you do this to me?" she exclaimed, her eyes glistening with tears, and her lips trembled with indignation. "You've ruined everything." They'll never forgive us now. I crossed my arms over my chest, looking at her without the slightest bit of pity. You lied to them, Celia, I said calmly. You lied to me. You've been using me since the day you moved in. I was desperate. Stop it, she shouted. Their approval means everything for Derek's future. And now we have nothing. I shrugged my shoulders. Which wouldn't be mine. You've always been jealous of me. She spat out, her face contorted with rage. Always. Just because Grandma left you this house. I grinned, shaking my head. She left me this house because she was my grandmother, not yours. And because I was the only one who spent time with her, who took care of her. You were only interested in what you could get from her. It's true. I said coldly. Just like the fact that you haven't changed a bit since we were kids. You still think that the world revolves around you, that the rules don't apply to you, that everyone has to adapt to you. But I'm not going to do that anymore. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Get out of my house, Celia. I turned around and went upstairs, ignoring her screams, locked myself in my bedroom and for the first time in a long time felt a strange, amazing calm. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. Barbara, what the hell is going on? She sounded both worried and annoyed. Celia called me yesterday in hysterics. She said you kicked her out and Alvise. They have nowhere to go. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. They can stay with you and Bruno, she continued. Your house isn't that small. That's not the point, I interrupted. Family helps family, you know. I laughed bitterly. Does this rule also apply to Celia? Because she didn't do anything to help me. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mom. She moved in with me, promised that it was temporary, and then invited her relatives without even asking me. She pretended to be the mistress of the house in front of them. When I asked them to contribute to the bills, she refused. And when her parents offered to kick me out, she didn't object. My mother stopped talking. Well, I'm sure she didn't mean. I don't care what she meant, I interrupted. They need to leave. Today. Barbara, please. No, Mom. And to be honest, I don't want to hear from either you or Bruno if you're going to take her side, as always. I'm tired of being the only responsible person in this family. I hung up before she could answer. By that evening, Celia and Alvise had packed their bags. They left without saying goodbye. In the following weeks, I found out that Celia's husband's family had severed all relations with her, considering her a traitor. My mother left voicemails, which gradually turned from demands to apologize to awkward offers to meet at a family dinner to discuss the situation. I deleted them without listening. 3 months later, peace reigned in my house. No one else took advantage of my generosity, condemned me in my own living room, or claimed what was rightfully mine. Utility bills returned to normal, work trips became a joy, not an attempt to escape from home. I converted Celia's former bedroom into an office where I could work in peace. Now I'm sitting on an old swing on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, I feel truly at home. This house is not just a building, it is my sanctuary, my legacy, my fortress. And finally, he belongs only to me again. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.